Hi guys! So today's video is going to be my June wrap-up, and I'm super excited because I ended up loving almost every single book I got around to. So first up, I kind of just gotta get out of the way because you guys have seen me talk about this series all the time, but I did read some more Witcher. I have a full series review up for it right now. You guys can check that out because I feel like every time I talk about Witcher, I end up giving like the same really brief synopsis of it. So now you guys can actually see an in-depth, non-spoiler review for it. Next up is a book that is hands down one of my absolute new favorites, and that would be Red Rising by Pierce Brown. It follows a man named Darrow who is part of a class of people known as the Reds, and these people are very much mistreated. They're essentially almost like slaves. Darrow in the book ends up trying to get his people more equality and get a better life for them by kind of infiltrating the higher classes of people. The first 55 pages, I believe, make up all of part one, and it's honestly some of the most emotional writing I've ever read. It's a very straightforward writing style. There's not a lot of fluff. It's not overly detailed. It's very direct. But it just was so tragic at the beginning, and so the rest of the time you're just like, you're just rooting for him to succeed and for him to, you know, like, I can't spoil stuff. I don't want to spoil stuff, but it's just so good. You guys have to read it. Next up, again with a book that just blew me away. It was so good. I'm like freaking out about it because there's only one book left in the trilogy, and I don't want it to end, and that would be The Well of Ascension the second book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I do have a book review up for the first book in this series, but I actually ended up enjoying the second one even more. For the first time ever, listened to it on audiobook. I've never listened to audiobooks before, and it was just great. The narrator for this series does different voices for all the characters, and his voice that he has for just the regular narration is fantastic. It's such a great, I think it's just a great series to try out on audiobooks. It was so intense, and there were so many, I wouldn't say twists or plot twists or anything like that, but I wasn't ever like figuring out what was gonna happen next. I was always taken aback by it was so good. I couldn't ever figure out, I couldn't guess what was gonna happen. So when a book can do that without feeling cheesy or gimmicky, I just feel like you know it's good. So next, this is the one book that wasn't like, you know, knocking my socks off good. And I feel bad because I think that I read so many books that I ended up liking this month that I ended up being almost too critical of this book, but I sat and I really made sure that I understood why it wasn't doing it for me, and that would be The School for Good and Evil by Selman Chainani. The premise of this book is that there are two girls who are taken to a kind of fantastical fairy tale-like land, and there's a school for good and there's a school for evil, and the two girls each think that they're supposed to go into one school and they end up going into the opposite. I think that that premise is so original and it's so cool, and I did really enjoy the premise of it, and I really enjoyed the way that the author took your typical fairy tale characters and fairy tale plot lines and kind of wove it into the story in a very original and new way. But for me, I wasn't the biggest fan of the writing style, and it's a very common writing style is that they wrote in third person omnipotent instead of third person limited. And the difference between those is that in third person limited, you can have multiple perspectives in third person limited, but generally when you're following a specific character within a chapter or a section of a chapter, you only are given that character's senses. You only see, you only hear, you only feel what that character is seeing, feeling, hearing, all that kind of stuff. And then of course with third person omnipotent or omniscient, you are kind of given a bird's eye view of everything that's happening in the story, so you always know essentially everything that's going on, and you're never tied down to one specific character. And for me, this writing style, I think, worked for this story because it creates a sense of kind of like whimsical and fantastical, and it feels more like a traditional fairy tale. You're being told a story rather than being pulled in and being tied down to specific characters at specific times. But I don't really like that writing style. For me, my favorite kinds of books are the ones where I'm emotionally attached to characters. If you guys have heard about this book and you want to read it, go for it. You should still read it because it's not a bad book. It's just a personal thing for me. I don't really care for that writing style as much. Another book I read this month actually wasn't initially on my TBR. I kind of swapped out some stuff and put this one on instead because so many of you guys said that I should get around to this book because you loved it, and that would be Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I'll admit that when I first started this book, I wasn't really feeling it. I liked the writing style. The writing style is artistic but also not dense, which I think is kind of a hard balance to have. But the first like 200 pages, I wasn't confused, but obviously you don't know what's quite going on because the character doesn't really know what's going on, so you have a lot of questions, and for a long time those questions aren't getting answered and even more questions are coming up. And then somewhere around page 200, the story just completely turns around and becomes really, really unique and quite beautiful. Next up, this is the first one, but I ended up reading the 5th book in the Fallen Kingdom series by Morgan Rhodes called Crystal Storm. You guys have heard me say in the past that this series is lots of fun, but it's not necessarily really stunning writing. I will say that the 5th book in the series, I think, there's something to be said about even if your writing style isn't beautiful, but you still like pull people in and make them go like, what? Or like, oh, and you can just make people annoyed or happy or frustrated and stuff. There's something to be said about that kind of writing too, I think. So the only complaint though is that this is a traditionally published book, which means there's an entire team of people that are working to polish this and make it perfect. And there were more typos than I've ever seen in a book in that 5th one. If I did formal book review ratings like 4-star, 5-star, things like that, I probably would have dropped the book an entire star because as somebody who's working to self-publish my own book, to see a book with that many typos that has a whole group of people working to make it perfect and they're not making it perfect, that kind of annoys me. It bothers me a lot because I'm like one person and I'm busting my butt to try to make my book as perfect as possible. I'm hiring a professional editor, which costs money, and this is like what a traditionally published book is supposed to offer. You know, that's the point of having it. So without going on too much of a tangent, I'm a little disappointed that the editing staff for Penguin didn't do a better job with that. I think that's like the most aggressive I've ever gotten on my channel, so I'm really sorry. I like staying positive. So we're gonna move right along to a book that I didn't find a single typo in, but that would be The Savage Song by V.E. Schwab. The premise of the book is that people, when they commit crimes or commit heinous acts, those acts will manifest themselves into one of 3 different kinds of monsters, and these monsters, they each have their own different kinds of abilities based off of the kind of a crime that a person committed that made them come into existence. And there are 2 main points of view. There is a human girl and a monster boy. Even though it is a young adult book, it is not filled with a lot of teenage angst. There isn't this ridiculous instant romance kind of thing. In fact, there isn't romance in this book, which is kind of refreshing in YA. Maybe potentially in the future of this series there might be a romance, but as of right now it's actually more of a friendship that develops within the midst of some pretty dark stuff. The last thing I read this month were some comic books, and I've been talking about these quite a bit recently, and that would be the Fables comics by Bill Willingham. The story for these comics is that there are a bunch of people and characters from fables or fairy tales, and they are pushed out of their homeland by someone called the Adversary and are forced to live in New York City in a place called Fabletown. The 2 main characters are Snow from Snow White and the Big Bad Wolf, and his name is Bigby. And to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't have thought that those 2 characters would be characters that I would be particularly drawn to, but absolutely, Bigby is one of my new favorite characters ever, and I actually really like Snow in these 2. Anyway, that's it though, guys. Those are all the books that I got around to this month. As you can see, I was like flabbergasted because it was just so many good books. If you guys have read any of these books or want to read any of these books, let me know in the comments section down below. But anyway, if you liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Click the little bell icon to get notified when I post videos, and check out some of my videos right over here. Don't forget that I'm hosting a giveaway. I will have the link for that specific video right over here, and I will see you guys later. Bye.